Now, we're being promised a strong and coordinated response this morning to yesterday's loss on the London stock market. British companies lost £64 billion off their value in the largest one-day fall in 2.5 years. It's all doom and gloom in the newspapers for the financial world, but is it all doom and gloom for us? Well, Jonathan Davis is a local economist and wealth manager. Jonathan, welcome to Three Counties Breakfast. I think when you say the staggering figure of £64 billion, to many of us it will kind of not resonate because it's just so much money that it's incomprehensible and we just shut down. The bottom line is, what impact will this have, if any, on our households in the three counties?
Well, the stock market has gone down not far short of 20% this year. I think it's got further to go. So clearly anyone who's got pensions, which is practically everyone, stocks and shares, ISAs, any other investments, they're hurting. And I think the big picture is what's probably more important. The big picture is that the stock market, they say that it forecasts what's happening in the economy. Actually, I believe it reflects what's happening in the economy. And I'm afraid to say the economy is dire. We've got massive debts. Households have got massive debts. The government's got massive debts. There's nothing we can do about it. The economy is absolutely dire, and people need to get to grips with that reality.
Having watched the news all week and followed this, it is being widely reported, of course, that if you raise inflation too much, you can do damage. If you don't raise it enough, then you won't get ourselves out of this crisis. Do you think that we are heading inevitably, whatever we do, for a double-dip recession?
Literally, without a doubt, we are in depression right now. We have been in depression. It hasn't felt like it because a couple of years ago, the then government borrowed another vast sum of money, handed it to bankers, decimated our currency, which meant that all our imports of fuel, of electricity, of gas, of food, of clothing, you name it, basically everything, all our imports started rising heavily. That's why we have inflation. Wages and earnings are not keeping up with inflation. We still have massive debts. There is nothing that the governments can do because for decades they've continued, whichever party it was, they've continued to borrow and borrow and borrow and pretend that basically everything is okay. And what they've done to shall we say, patch up the problems is they've cut interest rates over the last 20 or 30 years. Well, do you know what? We cannot cut interest rates anymore. We are at the end of the line. And that's the reason why countries, not companies, countries are going bankrupt. That's how bad the global situation is. So, individually, people need to secure A, their investments, and B, they need to secure their income. They need to do whatever they can to keep working because I'm telling you, unemployment is rising, wages are not rising, it is not going to get any easier. There is nothing the governments can do because they've done it already to us.
And there'll be people listening to the radio this morning, Jonathan, probably shouting at you, saying, well, it's easy enough for you to say you've got to secure your job and you've got to keep your job if you can. Sometimes the inevitable does happen, though, and it's already happened to a lot of people. If the jobs aren't there, then people can't have them.
Then you need to train, retrain, you need to work harder, you need to work smarter, you need to be more involved in your businesses, you need to not say to yourself, oh, the government will come up with something, the company will come up with something. No, you have to be you have to be hungry. You have to really make sure that you can do whatever you can in your organisations to keep the businesses going.
From what you're saying, it sounds like if we go under in this next bit of depression or if a double hit recession comes, it's our own fault and the only people we've got to blame is ourselves.
Well, in a sense, because the fact is, as well as governments borrowing vast sums over the last 30 years, people borrowed vast sums over the last 20 years. They have massive mortgages, massive credit card debt, massive car debt, and so on and so on. In aggregate, on a big picture level, yes, We have largely done this to ourselves, and also in terms of our politics, we've continued to bring in governments who have promised us more for less cost, but the reality is that people didn't want to see is that the less cost simply meant that the government borrowed to pay for the things that they promised. Well, do you know what? We are at the end of the line. People need to get to grips with that reality.
Jonathan, many thanks for speaking to us this morning. Jonathan Davis, a local economist and a wealth manager, are the only people we've got to blame for this recession ourselves.